James Gunn's Superman. It's a fast-paced movie that has a lot of characters and a lot of moving parts. But underneath all that are two great core strengths. Number one, it never loses the focus of its main character. And number two, that main character's arc is beautifully and intricately subtle. I'm Zach, I'm an independent self-published author, and this is Story Look, where we take a look at a story and see what it can teach us about writing. If you're not a writer, then stick around anyway, because this will still be like a review of Superman, of sorts. But if you are a writer, then welcome in. I know for myself, I've been waiting a long time with bated breath to see Superman play out in terms of the plot, and despite a few minor critiques, there's a lot of things that it does really well in terms of storycraft. So let's get into it. Superman is a story with a central theme of hope, which is embodied in the titular character. This Superman is the champion of humanity that I've been waiting to see return to the big screen for years now. He laughs, he cries, he gets frustrated, he runs the gauntlet of human emotions from a brilliant portrayal by David Cornsweet, and this Superman feels more grounded than he has in a very long time. This version of Superman grapples with meaning and purpose, what he believes it to be versus what he's made of it and why. This movie makes a lot of daring character choices that have been, quite frankly, very refreshing to see from a plot perspective. And all of these, of course, were penned by the writer and director, James Gunn. After the soaring success of Superman, there's been a phrase that I've seen floating around the internet, which is this: the gun never misses. And I'm surprised to say that I agree. I know I had a lot of my own worries leading up to Superman, and a lot of people did too, given James Gunn's track record for filmmaking. And I think you'll be able to see why if I explain it. Looking back at James Gunn's previous films in the realm of comic book movies, we have, in chronological order, Guardians 1, Guardians 2, Peacemaker, which was a TV show but still, Guardians 3, and then The Suicide Squad. Let's start with 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy. It turned out to be an incredible film about a group of troubled misfits working through their differences and coming together as a found family to defeat a bad guy. Then, a few years later, in 2017, we got Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which was an incredible film about a group of troubled misfits working through their differences and strengthening their bonds as a found family to defeat a bad guy. Those might sound similar on the surface, but they are both at Marvel. In 2021, James Gunn went over to DC to direct The Suicide Squad. They wanted his signature flair, and that is exactly what he gave them. And that's what sets this one apart. This turned out to be an incredible film about a group of troubled misfits working through their differences and coming together as a found family to defeat a bad, not guy, starfish. After that, things changed again in 2023, when James Gunn came back to Marvel to wrap up the Guardians trilogy, and he did so in a beautiful, original way, by focusing on a group of troubled misfits working through their differences and coming together as a found family to defeat a bad guy. Now, Peacemaker happened in 2022, and I haven't seen it, but from the trailers, I'd be very surprised if it wasn't something found family adjacent. Now, obviously, these are oversimplifications for truly great films. I love the Guardians trilogy, with number 2 being my favorite. A hot take, I know. And let's not forget, the first Guardians movie revolutionized the movie and trailer world as we know it today. Do you remember when the first trailer for Guardians of the Galaxy came out? How it used the iconic needle drops from the film? And how then almost every trailer since for a big budget movie has tried to replicate that success by using music from the 80s and 90s? That's all because of James Gunn's impeccable music taste. 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy revolutionized the trailer world the same way that the Inception blah did several years before. I could go on a tangent about that in terms of storytelling just because Hollywood, as usual, has misinterpreted the true success of the film. It's not the music, it's the characters in these movies and how James Gunn is able to make them relatable and down to earth. Guardians was a success for, at the time, a relatively unknown group of heroes, and that is truly attributed to James Gunn's skill as a director and a writer. But with that track record in mind, you can see how one might start to picture James Gunn as a sort of one-trick pony. And albeit he's the best to ever do it at that trick, he's got his stuff down. Guardians of the Galaxy and The Suicide Squad are such cult classic films because the characters are tangible and relatable, and that is no small task. But for a character like Superman, I was worried, personally, especially when we got the first details and we knew we'd be getting at least 3 members of the early Justice League. I started to wonder how much of the Superman movie would be focused on Superman. But thankfully, we were all proven wrong. Superman is the primary focus of his own movie, which should not be a revolutionary concept. But then you have shows like The Book of Boba Fett, which you think would be based around Boba Fett. But then Mandalorian is there and Boba Fett does not show up for 2 whole episodes. But I digress for the Star Wars fans out there. Superman's character is central to every moment of the film, and even in the scenes that he is not physically present in, all the other side characters are talking about him, or his arc, if you will. We open the movie on Superman, we close the movie on Superman, and every scene in between, he is the primary draw. Also, be warned, because we're getting into spoiler territory here, so consider yourselves warned. If you haven't seen it yet, please go do it. It's absolutely worth the watch. Superman's character arc is a beautiful and interesting one because it is, for lack of a better term, just the right amount of subtle. And what do I mean by subtle? Superman is a good guy. He is good at the beginning of the film, he is good at the end of the film. That does not change. He is tonally consistent throughout. What changes is the why. He believed he was sent by his Kryptonian parents to serve humanity. We hear that in recording that was damaged that came with him. And now when the back half of that recording is fixed and we hear the full message, we learn that he was sent by his Kryptonian parents to rule, to lord over Earth and humanity as the last son of Krypton. And that rocks Superman to his core. And on a story note, I love that narrative decision and I love that reveal. Why? Because it subverts expectations just as much for Superman as it does for the audience. If you as a writer are able to put in your main character's mind and your audience's mind something that both of them believe to be fact and then turn it on its head, you can do something really special and endear your audience to your main character very, very well because the two of you are going through the same feelings at the same time. Superman later gets taken back to Ma and Pa Kent over at their farm, where he has one of the most heartfelt scenes in a very heartfelt movie where Pa reminds him that it's his choices and his actions that define him and nothing else. And in the end, at the culmination of this arc, Superman gives a beautifully written monologue to Lex Luthor about this whole core behind his reasoning of why he's good. He says he loves, he gets scared, he tries all the time, and screws up all the time. But that's what it means to be human, and that's his true greatest strength. This Superman wants to be embraced by humanity so badly, but he doesn't often show it. David Cornsweet in an interview said that it's that feeling akin to when you're alone at a massive party, when you're surrounded on all sides by people but have no one truly by your side. And in that same final scene, Superman wants to connect, of all humans, with Lex Luthor, his greatest enemy. He gives him a proverbial olive branch or an extended hand, saying, "That's my greatest strength, and I hope for the sake of the world that you realize it's yours too." He's trying to turn his greatest enemy into a friend, knowing that he won't, but he's still going to try. And that whole scene is the fulfillment of this Superman's character arc, when he tells Lex that his expectations of what he is and why he does it are wrong. This is where Superman is saying himself that he doesn't believe that any outside expectations define him, because he's accepted it in himself. He's grown past the expectation, which is what I mean when I say that his arc is subtle. It is a perfect arc for what some would consider to be a perfect character. Likes and dislikes. I've got a lot of them. There's a lot that I like as a writer and both just as a pure fan. Number one is the suit. I had my reservations when I saw the initial, like the first release image, as I know everyone was kind of like, that's a weird one to go with, and it was. But over time and definitely seeing it in motion, seeing it in film, it absolutely grew on me and I love it. I love the Kingdom Come crest. It reminds me of Brandon Routh's Superman suit from Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is one of the best, if not the best, live-action Superman suit. But this one just suits his world excellently. Continuing with lights, there were a few other story beats, some small, some large, that surprised me. And I'm very happy to be surprised by a film's willingness to subvert expectations in the right way. Again, as already mentioned, the twist of his real purpose sent by his Kryptonian parents. I kept waiting for it to be proven that that footage or the message was doctored in some way, but the movie kept doubling down that it's legit, and I was thoroughly impressed and surprised with their commitment and happy that they did. Another story beat I liked was the battle with the kaiju that he fights alongside the Justice Gang. There's a quick line in there that I really particularly like. After the battle's over, Superman says that he wanted to find a way to neutralize it without killing it so that he could take it to an intergalactic zoo to study it. That line alone does so much for A, character building, and B, world building. It shows this Superman's value for life above all else, as well as that because this is not an origin film, it's refreshing to have a Superman who already knows the vast networks of things going on in space. and mentioning his love for life. In that very same fight, he saves dozens of people and even a squirrel at one point, all while scolding the Justice Gang for their careless and reckless nature like a disappointed dad. And quite frankly, that's the most Superman to ever Superman. Another really big moment that I liked was the Russian roulette scene. As comic book movie audiences, we've been given the MCU and other types of movies where you expect them to be a little toothless and without stakes. You think, in a scene like this, either A, Lex is bluffing, B, Superman's going to break out and save him at the last second, or C, none of the above, but C is kind of off the table in our minds. It's back there. It's like, oh yeah, this could happen, but you're not really ready for it to happen, and the abruptness at which it does caught everyone off guard. Second shot, instantly dead, absolute cinema. And Superman lets out this absolutely guttural, agonizing cry because he's powerless to save somebody. And if that's not Superman, I don't know what is. That is so integral to his character. And even Lex remarks, well, I didn't expect that to go so quickly. And then right after that is another character moment that I really love that I think not a lot of people are talking about, but it says so much to each of the characters involved. As he's leaving, Lex says, well, maybe I'll bring back somebody else to kill. Maybe that reporter that interviews you all the time. Maybe I'll kill Clark Kent. And Lex is so smug about this. Superman is still mourning over the death of an innocent man that just happened right in front of him. He can't even take the mental victory lap that Lex, this billion-dollar super genius, is so stupid. He doesn't realize that Clark Kent and Superman are the same person. And Superman can't even take the win in that moment because he's still mourning the fact that he was powerless to stop something so cruel. It is a genius and so well-written moment that showcases Lex's blind hate and Superman's blind love. Now, there's a lot more things that I can mention in terms of likes, like the score, the shot composition, the perfect casting for every character, how Lex is the perfect foil to Superman, and maybe I'll do a whole video on that, or just villains. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to see. But real quick, and this will be real quick because there's not many, let's get into a few dislikes. Number one, the pacing. It feels a bit fast, and that's very clearly intentional, and this movie does have a lot to do, but I really would have liked the slower moments to play it out a little bit more. Piggybacking off of that, I really would have loved more of Ma and Pa Kent. I really like their first scene, which reminds me of some of my family, and that scene on the farm is another beautiful one. I just wish we could have gotten a little more time with them. I understand why we couldn't because of the nature of the story, and what we got was great. It would have been perfect, I think, if we got just a little bit more. By the way, things like this with the pacing issues and more of a focus on the Kents are talked about a lot more by Alex over at High Top Films. He just put out a great video about Superman, which, as always with everything that he does, is extremely well written and top-notch production quality. I'd highly recommend going to check him out if you like these kinds of videos, only better. Final dislike, and there are probably some more that I've missed or forgotten about, but this one was a big one that stuck with me, was it kind of felt like a tease throughout all the trailers in the lead up to the movie. That one scene of the little boy with the Superman flag that was calling out to him, and Superman ultimately does not show up there. I get why, and it makes sense and all that sort of stuff, but it just feels like I was waiting for the payoff of this kid's calling out to Superman, and then you see Superman show up. And it also kind of feels like a plot contrivance that in the first half of the movie, Superman goes to this place and intervenes in this global conflict, and that's a big problem. People question the ramifications of his actions. However, in the back half of the movie, the Justice Gang go in Superman's stead to interfere in the same global conflict, and nobody bats an eye. Maybe that's an oversimplification, but it feels like there's some plot stuff going on there, but again, none of that is really big enough to take me out of the film. So overall, how would I rate James Gunn's Superman? Well, let's look at the criteria for the things that I look for in how you grade and look at a story, this one particularly being a film. We start with plot, we have the characters in the world, the watchability, which, talks about the pacing and the flow, the emotional connection, and the ending. Starting with the plot, it's fast-paced, it's quick, but despite its small holes, it does the most important thing, and really the one thing that it has to do, give Superman a tangible narrative arc. I'm a sucker for a parallel, and especially when it's used sort of to bookend a story, and this one has one of the best. At the beginning of the movie, you get the shot with Superman going through this healing process, listening to the voice message of his Kryptonian parents to soothe him. At the end of the movie, you get that same thing sort of playing out, but this time it's with his home videos from the Kent farm. And that, beautiful. I couldn't ask for a better parallel. The characters, perfect. There is very little else to say besides that. David Corenswet is Superman. He plays him with such heart and such nuance, and yet his warmth and kindness radiates through every scene that he is in. Nicholas Hoult is Lex Luthor, and I was worried about him most of all just because of the impression that I had for what Lex Luthor should be and what he should sound like. You know, I grew up with the animated Lex Luthor voiced by Clancy Brown in Superman the Animated Series, and same for Superman, voiced by Tim Daly. But Nicholas knocks it out of the park, and it only makes it better. It is the icing on the cake that he auditioned for Superman and didn't get the part. That is the most meta Lex Luthor thing that can happen, and he brings that to the role in such a perfect way. Rachel Brosnahan is the perfect Lois Lane, not just as a counterpart to Superman, but as her own standalone character. She has agency. She actually does investigative journalism. There is reason behind the things that she's doing that is not solely wrapped up in her love for Superman. She isn't defined by that love, but it is real. And I really like the decision that she hesitates to tell him that she loves him until the very final scene of the movie, so that you know she means it. The supporting cast is also perfect as well. I would have loved to see more of Wendell Pierce as Perry White. Incredible in every scene that he was in. I loved him, and I think he's perfect in that role, and again, I wanted to see a lot more of him. Same for Jimmy Olsen. I wish we got more of him and Clark together, but their first scene when he gets the front page, you know, that does enough to tell you their friendship, but I would have liked to see more of them two together. But again, all the background characters, all the supporting cast, everyone is excellently and perfectly cast. The pacing and flow and sort of the watchability. Again, I think it was a bit fast, and to its detriment or to its benefit, that can allow the slower moments to become a lot more of a key focus. It makes the scene with Clark and Lois talking to each other while the interdimensional imp is fighting outside feel a lot more grounded and real and like a breath of fresh air. Same with the scene when Clark's sitting on the front porch of the Kent farm watching Krypto play with Ma and Pa's cows. Apparently, I've heard the film was originally structured to flow like the days of the week, which you can kind of sense that if you know it in the back of your mind when you're watching the film. There's some kind of harsh cuts to the next scene that if there was to say a title card that said Monday, that would make a lot more sense. And I kind of don't know why that was taken out of the film, and I'd love to see would that put back in. But again, all of these narrative decisions from a storytelling perspective, I can understand that it's an active process and changes as it goes throughout. But I think it would have done wonders for the pacing overall if we got that sort of weekly structure to it. Emotional connection. Surprisingly, I didn't cry in this movie as much as I thought I would. And for those of you who don't me, I cry at movies a lot if the emotion is there and done right. But me not crying at this film does not say that the emotion is not there. This movie wears its heart on its sleeve, and in this era where media literacy is at an all-time low, it kinda has to. James Gunn has to take the line about hope being the real punk rock and hit you over the head with it just to make sure you get it. And for emotional connection, I love that scene and that conversation. It really shouldn't work, but it does, only because of the direction and the performances. To quote filmmaker Alan C. Wright from the channel Cinema Therapy, definitely go check them out, corny dialogue doesn't work unless it does. And here it works, because the movie is all about an emotional connection and an emotional uplift. And finally, that brings us to the ending, which is perfect. I already mentioned I'm a sucker for a parallel and how that bookends the story, but look at what this does on a much smaller, more subtle scale. At the beginning of the movie, Superman has to go through this painful process of being healed. But at the end of the movie, he sits in his chair with a smile on his face, as though he's already been internally healed through the progression of his character. And also, it took me a while to realize this, which I didn't clock when I was in the theater. He does what all the great Supermen do at the end, and he smiles at the camera, which is just icing on the cake and an homage to all the great Supermen that came before. So the final verdict. Overall, I'd give Superman an 8 out of 10. It surpassed my expectations, kept everything centralized to the main character, and gave him an arc worthy of a Superman story. If I were writing it, I would have maybe adjusted the pacing a little bit, and I would have rewritten a few clunky lines of dialogue, but this film's greatness outweighs any minor critique that I could throw at it. Application. This is the part for writers specifically. What can we learn from a story crafting perspective about this Superman's story and character arc? Looking back at this movie's two great core strengths, we'll take them in turn. The first being keeping everything centralized on the main character. In this movie, there are about 8 other primary characters besides Superman running around, which all have arcs and all have things to do. Some of these characters include Lex Luthor, the 3 members of the Justice Gang, the Daily Planet crew, and a few more. And all of these have scenes either with Superman or on their own. But the key focus throughout all these scenes and throughout the entire movie is focused on the main character, Superman. So how do you do that as a writer? If you have got so many moving pieces and so many characters, but you don't want to run the risk of your story going off on a tangent or losing its core meaning? 2 words: write thematically. This is a lesson I learned on my last book, Somebody to Hate, which is a murder mystery with a lot of moving parts and a lot of main characters, and I struggled with this exact same thing. Some of the conversations that I was writing with some of my more minor characters felt like they were purposeless or didn't contribute to the overall plot or move anything forward in any meaningful way. So then I stopped and I took a step back and intentionally wrote out the core themes that I was trying to communicate throughout the plot of my book. Then I found ways to center my characters' conversations around that main theme, which inherently gave them meaning, even if only in a small way. Specifically, this hit me in a scene where I was writing a catch-up dialogue between Michael Hightower, my main character, and one of his old elementary school teachers. All of the dialogue that I kept trying to write the first few passes felt stilted and lifeless and just something to speed through so we could get to the real conversation. And it stayed that way until I remembered one of the core themes that I'm trying to communicate throughout the book: differing points of view. With that in mind, I rewrote the conversation to have the 2 of them wax nostalgic and talk about their own views or interpretations of the past, even throwing in the line, "I doubt that's how they saw it." That line alone speaks to a larger story of characters who experience the same events but see them through differing points of view. And so what have I just done? I've taken a previously meaningless conversation and turned it into something that is supportive and supplementary to the overall plot. And I did it by writing thematically. Looking at an example from Superman, we can watch this play out in real time. Lois Lane goes to the Justice Gang and tries to convince them to help her find Superman, who's missing at the time. So Superman is absent from this scene. It's an uphill battle for her to convince them because what has just happened is they have heard the message from his parents that he was sent to rule Earth, and they have lost hope in Superman as a character. Again, the central theme of this movie is hope, which the Justice Gang have currently lost in the character. Lois eventually tells them that she knows Clark and tries to convince them that she knows he's not a tyrant. And eventually it does work. Mr. Terrific goes with her in an incredible scene, and then later that allows the rest of the Justice Gang to come help them at the end of the movie. But, point being, that scene without Superman in it was completely centralized on Superman's character and his character arc, as well as the movie's overall theme of hope. And it's the same for all the other side characters. Everything that they do has a focus on theme, and it moves the plot forward with Superman in mind. The second core strength of this movie, which we've already talked about, so I'll make this quick, is the use of a subtle character arc. Superman grows, he shifts and changes his perception of his why, but he remains tonally consistent throughout, whereas other more drastic character arcs usually show a character going from bad to good or vice versa. Looking at examples from other books, look at The Portrait of Dorian Gray or Lord of the Flies, where you watch characters slowly descend into madness due to their circumstances. They're civil and upstanding at the beginning, but turn corrupted and savage by the end. The intensity of what they've gone through has changed them that drastically. They have tonally shifted. A character arc like that is a lot easier to notice the change from beginning to end. It's sort of a night and day difference, which is why I call an arc for a character like Superman more subtle. He's good at the beginning, he stays good at the end. The arc is more internal to the why behind that good. Another character with a similar arc would be Bilbo Baggins from The Hobbit. At the beginning, he loves his hobbit hole, his armchair, and his fine china. But then he's recruited onto an adventure, and all the while that he's away from home, he's thinking about home. Now, of course, he does get a taste for this adventure and wants to help the dwarves, but that motivation comes from his tonal consistency. He loves his own home so much that he realizes what a pain it is to be without it. And the fact that these dwarves have lost their home, he wants to help them get it back, to restore the comforts that they once had and that he himself once had. And so Bilbo is a tonally consistent character. Throughout the story, and despite all the adventure he goes on, he still is humble and he loves the comforts of his own living room. And that is what he values above all else, which sets him apart from all the rest of the characters in the story. However, when he finally does get to go back home, he is changed internally by the nature of the adventures that he has gone on, just like Superman. So that's what I love and what I think we as writers can learn from James Gunn's Superman. What did you think about it? Did you agree or disagree with any of my assessments? Let me know down in the comments below, and also let me know if there's anything else you'd like me to review next on Story Look. I've got a big back catalog of books and movies that I'm wanting to look into, but if there's anything specific you'd like to see, let me know, and then I can jump straight into that. Also, quick note, James Gunn, if you're watching, I know you're not planning to introduce The Flash into the DCU for the next couple years, but if you need somebody to write the script, I'm very available. You can reach me by email at zandersonauthor@gmail.com, or hit me up on my website, zdapress.com, or hit me up on Instagram at ZachAndersonAuthor, if you need somebody. But thank you all so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe, as it would really, really help out the channel and mean a lot to me. And if you have a book and you need an editor or a cover designer, then check out my website, www.zdapress.com, and get in touch with me there. Thanks again, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one.